Thank you so much, Paul, for coming and join us and present at this Microsoft Dynamics 365 Meetup group. I'm so excited to hearing you presenting about the Microsoft 365 security with more than 20 years of experience in the space and providing the technical solution delivery while teaching the Microsoft to various audience from around the world. Super excited to see what you are presenting and learning about some of these really cool things. So without further ado, take it away, Paul.
Thank you. Thanks, Jason. And welcome everybody to this little presentation on Microsoft 365 security. So this is me. That's a few years ago. You can notice one difference is I have less hair. I actually had a little bit of hair back then. That's disappearing fast nowadays. I've got some certifications, and I've also got my contact details on here. I'll put them in the chat window later on. I can't see that at the moment as I'm presenting, so I'll pop these details in so you don't have to write them down desperately fast if you want to.
I would certainly put all of those details and share them as we do finish the post-production and sharing that in the email, newsletter, LinkedIn, and all other channels. I'll make sure to put all those things as well.
Perfect, Jason. Thank you. Okay, so as Jason mentioned, I've been in IT for a really long time. I'm an old fart nowadays. I got my first Microsoft certification in 1997, which probably tells you how long I've been around. And tonight we are going to talk about Microsoft 365 security. It's not Dynamics specifically related, so if you came for that, this is a little bit different, but hopefully you find it interesting. So about 6 months ago or so, time flies, could be a little, it's about 6 months ago, I work part-time for a company called Altaro. They're actually now bought by Hornet Security, but that's a long story and not important. I wrote an ebook for them called about Microsoft 365 security, and that ebook is free. So we'll pop that link in. Jason will have that link and pop that in as well, so you can go and download it. You do have to trade your email address, but other than that, I think maybe your name as well, for a bit of marketing. But of course, you can unsubscribe afterwards. But otherwise, it's completely free. Comes with an Excel spreadsheet as well. I'll talk about that in a minute. Then we're going to talk about the shared responsibility model in Microsoft 365. Then I'm going to talk briefly about, and briefly is important here, right? This is all what I can fit into an hour, and the whole ebook is a lot more than can fit into one hour, plus a little bit of time, or with a little bit of time for questions at the end. So I'm going to touch on the highlights here. Things like identity security, email security, SharePoint security, OAuth applications, secure score, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about Microsoft 365 E5, and then we'll have some Q&A towards the end. Now, I'm happy to take questions as we go. I can't see you at the moment, as in I can't see any questions you post, but Jason will surface them to me as we go. So don't feel like you have to wait to the end, because I don't like presentations like that, because you got a question right then and there. So just pop it into the Q&A window or the chat window, and we can cover it as soon as I get up to my next demo window, and then we can talk about it then. So here's the free ebook. So it's called Microsoft 365 Security Checklist, a practical guide for the time-strapped admin. And it's 107 pages. It's 10 chapters, plus the 11th page chapter is the checklist itself. And it basically helps you go through and look at a Microsoft 365 tenant, which can include Dynamics 365, of course, and go through and do all the things you should look at. Now, I'm an IT consultant. I run my own business as well, so I do this for clients. And of course, it depends. It's not as easy as, why doesn't Microsoft just turn all this on for everybody? And that's one of the things I'm going to talk a little bit about tonight, because it depends on the client, and it depends on your needs, and a lot of other factors. So Right. So the shared responsibility model. Very often when I talk to colleagues and other people in IT, they tell me, well, it's in the cloud, so it's secure, isn't it? Like, Microsoft or AWS or GCP or Oracle or IBM or whoever takes care of security. And that's not strictly true. In some ways, it's true in that if you have a regulation that says that you have to have armed guards around your data center, yes, moving your stuff to the cloud means that now there is an armed guard there that you don't have to pay for or worry about. So you can tick that box, right, in your compliance regulation. But it's not, it doesn't mean that they take care of everything, right? And this is one of the big misconceptions people often have about cloud security. So this little screen here, or this little picture here, talks about what the differences are, right? So with on-premises, of course, you're responsible for all of it, right? That makes sense. Infrastructure as a service, so running VMs in Azure or AWS, or platform as a service, so running your code on top of code platforms in Azure or AWS or Google or whoever, has a certain set of responsibilities. Tonight, of course, we are looking at the SaaS side of things over here. So the software as a service, data classification and accountability. So all the data that is yours in your business that you put in the cloud is your responsibility. Now, Microsoft makes it available in the sense that they have multiple copies of the data. So if a server dies or a hard drive dies or something else dies, even if a data center is temporarily down, there's a copy somewhere else. However, they don't back up your data, right? They don't classify your data because they don't know what the data is. They can't look into your data. It's your data, so you got to look into it. So that's all your responsibility. Now, the client and the endpoint protection, of course, is your responsibility. So you have machines, definitely endpoint machines, so smartphones and laptops and desktops and whatever, and they're connected to your cloud data. Well, you're responsible for those machines, right? You're responsible for that security. And you're responsible for identity. Like if you make everybody in your tenant a global administrator because it's easy and now they can do everything they need to do, you've just sort of compromised the security capabilities here, and that is all on you to maintain identity and access management security, right? You have to control who gets permissions to what, and so forth. And then there's a lot of gray area, like the slide doesn't, or the picture doesn't really show that, but there's gray areas in between these, right, where some is your responsibility and some is not. And I'm noticing that my screen has frozen. Can you just confirm that you can still hear me, Jason?
I can hear you. I can see your screen, and the mouse is moving.
But you can't see my video.
Oh, okay. Let me double check.
It doesn't matter. I mean, I don't need to. People don't necessarily need to see me. I can turn that back on if you want. Something is.
Yeah, it's completely up to you. I think it's completely right. I feel like I am certainly paying more attention on the share screen like this, especially this share responsibility model.
Okay, I'm back. Let's see how that goes. Let's see if it keeps playing up. Then I might turn the camera off permanently.
That is a good idea.
Right. So hi, Tom. Hi, Mott. Now I can see the people who are here. Okay, so we move on to the next slide, if it's going to let me. Okay. Fabulous technology. Whoa, there you go. And it jumped many, many slides. All right, so let's see if we can go back. There we go. All right, so we try again. There we are. Okay, so identity security, and this is probably one of the most important things. So I'm sure you've heard the buzzword zero trust, and this is of course the concept of modern security. So in the past we used to have perimeter security. You were on the corporate network in the office and everything on the inside was secure and everything on the outside was not. And there the camera disappeared again. I think there's something up with my camera. I don't know why, but I think that's what's happening. And it's disappearing. But if you can still hear me, I will continue.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'll keep going. We'll see how we go. So zero trust. So nowadays, of course, that's not how it is, right? You've got a lot of people working from home, working from wherever. You have data in the cloud that never is on premises. So we need a new, or newer at least, approach to security, and that's zero trust. Basically, three things. Explicitly verify every connection, no matter where you're coming from, right? Whether you're on the corporate network or you're coming from home or whatever, verify that that is you. Assume that you have been breached. So don't just protect everything. Also go, okay, what do we do when it is compromised? What do we do when somebody's on our network? How do we spot that? What do we do when that happens? So that's assume breach. And the third one is, only grant the permissions that people need. So the minimal, least privileged access that they need. So that starts with identity security, because we've got to make sure we know who the people are who sign in, and they really are the people who should be signing in. So MFA, again, I'm assuming you guys are in IT, so I'm sure you have been part of this many times. You get a prompt on your phone, or you got a YubiKey or some other way. So that is, you need to have that today. Not all MFA is created equal, and I'll show that in the demo in a minute. But even if you make sure everybody connects with MFA, and that's all great, unless you turn it off, and Microsoft is actually doing this for us, at least for smaller clients, as they go forward. They used to sort of leave it to us, but if you haven't checked that it is turned off, you've got to go and turn off all the old protocols. There's about 13 different protocols. Because they don't support MFA, the attackers really like these protocols, because even if you have MFA turned on, if they got your username and password that they can get through various methods, they can still get in. So you want to turn those off. Security defaults. So if you're a small and medium business, you can turn on security defaults, which is basically, hey, this is Microsoft's set of recommended settings, and it's all or nothing. Like, you can't customize it, you can't change one or the other. It's just, you turn all this on and you get a bunch of defaults. I don't particularly like it, because I don't like the lack of control. But if you're a small business who maybe don't have somebody helping you with your IT, it makes perfect sense to just turn that thing on. And I'll show you that in the demo in a minute as well. I won't show you privileged identity management because we don't have time, but the concept here is that for your administrators, they are ordinary users most of the time. When they need to be administrators, they sign in and they elevate their privileges, and then they can de-elevate their privilege, or their privileges get taken away from them again, which means that the window for an attacker to get in is much smaller, because the administrator is not an administrator permanently. You want to brand your logon pages. I won't be showing you that either, but basically you want to put your logo and your backgrounds, so that when your users go to log into Office 365, they see a familiar environment. And that means that unless an attacker has taken extra care to steal your pictures and steal your logo and customize their phishing email that they just sent to your users, that are going to trick them into giving, entering their username and password on a fake login page, they're going to go, hang on, this doesn't look, this is like the generic Microsoft 365 one. It should have our logo on it. Self-service password reset is built in and allows your users to reset their password when they forgot it. And if you have your on-premises Active Directory connected to the cloud Azure Active Directory, you can have the password change be rewritten back, or written back to your on-premises Active Directory as well. And unified auditing needs to be turned on. So this is auditing across Exchange and SharePoint and OneDrive and all the other Office 365 workloads, and it gives you a nice way of having a trail if something goes wrong. So identity security, really important. So let's go and have a demo, and I can now see the chat as well, which is fantastic. So it doesn't look like there are any questions. There's just hellos and stuff, which is kind of cool. So let's do a demo. And hopefully you can still see my screen. So this is the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. You've got all your different admin centers over here. You've got the basic stuff over here. And for most of the identity-based stuff, you want to head over to Azure Active Directory, which is going to take us to this page. Now, on the Azure Active Directory Admin Center, and for somebody who has been paying attention, there is now a new portal called Entra, which is there's a link to here. I'm not going to show you that now, but you can go there. It's in preview, and it sort of has the same stuff, but it's laid out slightly differently. It's actually laid out more logically than the old portal, but that's the Entra portal, part of the naming or branding that Microsoft is doing. So here we can see a tenant and their overall directory with all these different links to different things. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go to security, and then we're going to go to multi-factor authentication. How's the Zoom level, Jason? Is that working? Can everybody see that okay?
I can see it clearly from my laptop. How about everyone else? Tom said it's perfect.
Perfect. Fabulous. Okay, excellent. So I'll leave this here. So there's a bunch of MFA settings here as well. Again, not going to go into these in detail here because we don't have time, but I do cover quite a few of them in the book. But I did want to show you this page here. So this is the additional cloud-based multi-factor authentication settings. This is actually going to disappear eventually, although Microsoft hasn't said when, but we do have something called authentication strengths, which is sort of going to be the replacement for this. But I did want to show you that you can have certain IP address ranges where you're not going to get prompted for MFA. In this case, this could be an internal set of IP addresses for your network. And this is what I wanted to show you. So at the core level of what Microsoft offers with MFA to everybody, you don't need any particular licensing for this. You've got Office 365, even basic licensing. You have these settings. You can turn on and off certain MFA features. So you will notice that in this tenant, I have turned off call to phone and text message to phone. These two MFA methods are better than just a username and password, but they are not particularly secure. They are bypassable. A notification through mobile app, so your Microsoft Authenticator app, which is free, which sits on your phone, is much more secure. Again, it is not perfect. You may have heard in the news, 3-4 weeks ago, there was an Uber hack where a support engineer at a company, I think he wasn't directly employed by Uber, whatever, he had access. And what happened was that they sent him a bunch of notifications to his through his MFA thing, and then they sent him a message saying, "Hey, this is IT support. We're testing a new MFA system. Can you just press approve for us, please?" And that's how they got in. And then you can have a verification code, your classic 6-digit code that most people are aware of. Those are better. Again, not perfect, but they are better. And in this case, I have it set to the Microsoft default that if you have successfully logged in and performed MFA on a particular device, we will trust that device for 3 months. Again, not a perfect setting, but there it is. So that's the MFA settings. Now, the way we do this in the newer way, as I said, this is the old page, is we have these things called require MFA conditional access policies. Again, I could talk the whole night about conditional access policies. These are very powerful and they allow you to do all sorts of things. As you can see here, we block international access to this client because they only do business and they only work in Australia. We do legacy authentication, which I'll talk about in a second. And here is where we require MFA for admins. So instead of going into an individual user, which we would do over on this screen here, right, I would go up to users here. I don't want to do it now because I don't want to give away users working at this company and their names. But you basically, if I clicked on users here, you get a list of 125 users working at this business. You'd pick a user and you turn on MFA for them. Here, using conditional access instead, what we do is we say, I might zoom out a little bit so you can see that a little bit more clearly. So we say for all cloud apps, and there's an excluded user here so that I don't lock myself out by mistake. For all the cloud apps, the condition is one condition selected, and the grant is one control selected. And the control here is, right, that we require multi-factor authentication. And the condition is that if you are coming from these client apps, from browser apps or mobile apps, and you are an administrator at this business, you have to do MFA. So at the very minimum, you need to have MFA turned on for your administrators. It should be on for users as well, but that's a little bit trickier to deal with. And as far as conditional access goes, let me show you one more, which is the legacy authentication. So here I've gone down and I have said for the client apps, so legacy, Exchange ActiveSync, and other clients, right, I'm going to block access, right? So you'll see we're just blocking access to those protocols. It's just turned off. You can't use those legacy protocols. Okay, that's those things. I'll show you where to turn on security defaults. So I'm back in Azure Active Directory Admin Center, and I have gone to properties, and under tenant properties at the very bottom here, you've got manage security defaults, and you'll see that this shows up on the right hand side, and I basically can turn them on or off. As I said, once I do this, I will no longer have conditional access policies. I can't customize those, but everybody has to do MFA, and everybody has to do MFA with the Microsoft Authenticator app. So security defaults, great for small businesses that don't need any customization. If you're larger, may not be the way to go. And I did mention it before, but I'll mention it again. I'm happy to take questions as we go. So you pop any questions in there and Jason can surface them to me as we go along. Do I want to show you branding logo? Yeah, well, I suppose we can do that briefly while we're on this screen. So here we can see the company branding. So we've got a background picture, we've got a logo, so that when somebody goes to this page, they get to see their custom backgrounds. And if they get the generic Microsoft ones, they're going to go, hey, this isn't normal. All right, so let's head back to the presentation and let's talk about email security. Now, email is still the biggest threat vector for a tenant today. Again, this is a partnership between you and Microsoft. Yes, they provide the technology, but you have to go in and turn it on. There's basically two levels here, well, three, I suppose. Everybody gets Exchange Online Protection, EOP, and that's five different antivirus engines scanning your email or attachment as they come in. It is anti-spam, it's reputation, it kills 90-95% of all the bad stuff long before it even hits your inbox. But the advanced stuff is in Defender for Office 365, and we'll come to that when we talk about E5 at the end, but this is the advanced stuff. So for instance, I have this on for my tenant, and it's also on for this production tenant that I'm demoing in today. And if somebody sends an email with an attachment that Microsoft has not seen before, so a Word or a PDF or an Excel file or, I don't know, some other file type Microsoft hasn't seen before, what will happen is it will be opened in a virtual machine in Microsoft's cloud running Outlook, and then it will inspect to see what happens when that attachment is opened. And this takes a few seconds. It can take up to sort of 60 seconds sometimes. But basically that gives you the best protection, because if there is malware in that attachment, it will be detonated in that sandbox in the cloud. And now you know that, you won't get the email basically because it's obviously bad, right? And you have some control over that. It also scans your links and those sorts of things. One thing that is available to everybody that you should do, and I'll demo that in a minute, is to disable forwarding. And a favorite attack method of of bad guys is when they get a foothold. Maybe they don't compromise your entire network, but they get a foothold into your tenant, and they compromise a user or two, and they can get into their inboxes. Is to set up email forwarding so that they can sit quietly and watch what emails are being sent to and from the users that are compromised. And this is a precursor often to business email compromise scams, literally in the name, right? Where they will perhaps insert themselves in a conversation between somebody in your finance department and somebody who sends invoices regularly. So they've watched for a month or two, they know when the invoices are coming, and they just change the account number, or they send an email that looks like it's coming from that invoice, the company who sends invoices regularly to you, and saying, hey, we just changed banks, can you please change this bank account number? And then of course the money doesn't go there, it goes to the attackers. So we can turn this off so that people can't set up these forwarding rules. Again, you might have to work a little bit with the business here, because there are legitimate reasons why you might want to have tenant forwarding, but you probably don't want to have it on.
I have a question here, Paul.
Yep.
So one of the phishing method that I noticed that I get a lot, where those attackers trying to phish the information out for me, is you trying to pretend to be someone else. Now, because we are in the industry, so I do pay a little bit extra attention to the email address, the URL, to make sure it comes from the legit organization. But I cannot assume that everyone does it, especially with perhaps different demographic. The more advanced, so the not so advanced one, they probably just have a string of completely whatever the URL that is. But the more advanced one that I see lately a lot is, supposedly, let's just say you have a company called Microsoft.com, and someone else, they registered the email account and the domain as Microsoft.co or Microsoft.io, and then they use it to attack and try to paste the information. And considering that sometimes even I may not even pay super extra attention to the URL itself, like and I may just accidentally click it. Would Microsoft, with those security that are in place, know how to deal with those things? Or
they do. They do, and that's an excellent question, Jason. And absolutely, let's talk a minute about that, because I think it's a good question. So basically, that's called spoofing, right? Somebody's pretending to be somebody else. Now, spoofing could be pretending to be the CEO of your company, or in this case, pretending to be from Microsoft when it's actually a different URL. One of the reasons for this is that emails actually have two from addresses. Don't want to go into the technical details here because we don't have the time, but basically there's two different addresses, and they should sort of basically be the same, but sometimes they're not. And it's only one that's going to be shown in Outlook or your email client, and neither really are going to be shown in your email client on your smartphone. So that makes it even harder to see who's who. And yes, it is a favorite way to do it. Now, Microsoft has a number of impersonation protections built in for everybody. They actually used to be an advanced security feature, so you had to have the advanced licensing to get those extra protections. And then Microsoft realized that people have been compromised left, right, and center. So it's actually on for everybody now. You do get more reports if you have the higher licensing, but essentially what it comes down to is you want to check and make sure that that it's the right address. Now, whatever comes through the filters comes to you. You do want to talk to your, whoever manages your Office 365 tenant to make sure they have the right settings turned on there so that you spot that stuff. But yeah, the other side of this coin, again, we don't really have time to go into it now, is that you need to train your users. And if you do have Microsoft 365 E5, or you have a third-party service, there's several out there. KnowBe4, for instance, is one that's very popular. You basically try to send simulated phishing emails like the ones you just described to your users. So these will show up in their inbox, and then they will pretend to be an invoice. Hey, click here for the link to the invoice. Or they will be pretending to be from Microsoft. Hey, we want to change your account number, or whatever it is, right? And they have all these different flavors of ones. But when the user, some percentage of your users will click the link or open the attachment or whatever, instead of being, attacked by malware, they'll get a message saying, hey, this was just a simulation, but had this been real, you would be in trouble. And here's some training to help you. Microsoft has that. It's called attack simulation. Or you can use a third-party tool. But that's really important. You got to help your users, because they got to always be on their toes to catch that stuff. And the last bit. Sorry,
I have a follow-up question, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
So on the other hand, if we look at from the business side, and that is a legitimate reason to do it in that way, which is to ensure the email deliverability is good, and where, especially those companies where they are sending thousands and thousands of the newsletter, they don't want the email to harm their reputation. So my understanding is there are companies would then set up, say, instead of Microsoft.com, they would probably say they set up Microsoft.co, or maybe they use the subdomain, which is mail.microsoft.com, as a way to get around to increase the email delivery. How, given that is the case, how would that contradict to what I just asked before, and it then doesn't get considered as a scam or spoofing or phishing?
Yeah. So okay. So yes, this is obviously a big topic of discussion. And yes, you're right. Like there are legitimate senders who send, as you said, marketing emails or something on behalf of you. So, and it ties in very nicely to what I was just about to say. So at the bottom of this slide, you see SPF, which stands for Sender Policy Framework, DKIM, domain keys, internet mail, maybe? No, there's something I forgot. And DMARC, I've forgotten what that one stands for as well. I used to know my acronyms. I think I'm getting old, but you can look them up. But I know what they are and I know how they work. And basically those three frameworks together, the concept here is exactly tying in with what you were just saying. DKIM is, or SPF is, when somebody sends you an email, how likely is it to be a spammer who's sent it to you? You can check the SPF records, and if a sender doesn't have the SPF record set up properly, right, then you're more likely, or the email systems are more likely to see that as spam. DKIM is when you send me an email, or sorry, when your company's email server sends me an email, I can go and check, are you authorized, or not I, but the email servers can go and check, are you authorized to send email on behalf of Microsoft.com or Microsoft.co, or whatever the other domains you mentioned. And DMARC is the other way around. So if you receive an email from my organization, you can check my DMARC records, and if the email is not coming from a server you have specified is allowed to send as me, I'm going to treat that differently. And you can actually tell me in your policy that if it's coming from me, or looks like it's coming from my organization, but it's not coming from these email servers, then you can just kill it because it's not us. Now, that, of course, means that if you have legitimate providers, like you were just mentioning, Jason, that are sending mail on behalf of my organization, sending marketing emails that I do want to go through, I got to make sure I add them to my DMARC so that when the receiving servers get those, they can go and check and say, yep, this makes sense. We know this is set up, right? So that's all part of the overall ecosystem to make this work. I hope that answered your question. All right, so let's have a quick demo of email security. So this is the compliance.microsoft.com portal. This is where we turn on auditing. If your tenant has a yellow banner here that says, unified auditing is not enabled, which means it's an old tenant and you haven't gone in here and clicked, You just need to turn it on. That's really all I'm going to show you on this screen, but it's very important that you have that on, because every action that every user takes is logged here, and that then gives you a way of tracking what happened if something happens after the fact. Now, threat policy. So this is where we're looking at the security.microsoft.com, which has become an incredibly centralized portal for everything to do. So it's called Microsoft 365 Defender, and it's basically the central portal for all the security tools now. And this is where we have your anti-phishing, we have your anti-spam, anti-malware, we have safe attachments and safe links, which I'll show you in a second. We have allow and block lists, right? So you can set up that these domains or these senders are allowed to send to us. These are your email authentication settings, which is DKIM. You also have authenticated receive chain, just to complete the picture there for you, Jason, on your question. If you have email that is passing through a third-party service, so you might have a service that does something, maybe it adds email footers and you're not using Microsoft technology for that to every email, or you're doing something else like that, that's going to break some of these email authentication protocols like DKIM and DMARC and SPF, because it's going to say, well, hang on, you're saying this email is coming from Microsoft.com, but it's going through this other third-party service, so I can't trust it, right? Because that could be a bad guy. So with authenticated receive chain, you can sort of include those third-party services in there. Quarantine policies, what happens to junk mail, that sort of thing. And very briefly, I'll show you safe attachments. So here we have the default Microsoft policies built in, but I just did want to show you that you can create your own. So demo, and just going to add in myself here in this policy, grab that one there, and here are the settings. So for attachments coming in, I want to do dynamic delivery. So this is the default nowadays, and it's really handy. So when you get an email coming to you with a potentially malicious attachment, you're going to get the emails straight away. And it's going to say, hey, there is an attachment here, but we haven't finished scanning it yet. And what's fairly new, 6 months, a year maybe, is you can actually preview it. So somebody sends you a Word document. Microsoft hasn't established whether it's safe or not yet, but you can see it in a read-only way. So you could actually go to page 2 and read that thing that somebody needs to send you really urgently, but you can't actually open the Word document yet because we don't know whether it's safe or not. So that's dynamic delivery. Then you can set up what's the quarantine policy around that, and what are you going to do if it times out for some reason. So that's safe attachment policies, which I think we already looked at. This threat protection here gives you some reports, so we can see different emails that have come in here and that have been scanned and found to be bad. So we had some file detonations based on reputation, and on this day here, so what's that, 3 weeks ago, we had some anti-malware engine catch some stuff on that particular day. And then finally, I wanted to show you the can I get there? Yes, I can. There you go. So I wanted to show you the auto forwarding turn off rule. So from this particular domain, nobody can set up auto forwarding from their email, right? So remember, somebody breaks in, gets somebody's username and password and go to their Outlook, and they set up an email forwarding rule, which is all quiet behind the scenes, right? Unless the user actually goes and looks at their rules, which most people don't do on a regular basis, they won't see that there is a forwarding rule there. So you can go in here, and we've turned on auto forwarding here, right? So if the message type is auto forward and is received from inside the organization, and reject the message, right? So, and there is an exception for a group here. I could actually never get that to work. There was some technical reason that didn't work. So this is blocked for everybody. Yeah, at this particular tenant. Right, okay, so if there are no other questions, I didn't see anything in chat. No, I'm going to head back to the presentation and talk about external sharing. There's literally one bullet point here, but it's quite an important one. So SharePoint, of course, is one of the big workloads in Office 365, and it's also behind the scenes what runs your OneDrive for Business, where everybody stores their files. And thus, you need to block sharing here that you don't want from a business reason, but you do want to make sure you have the right sharing turned on. So this is the SharePoint Admin Center. And yes, all of these portals are covered in the book, so you don't have to remember any of this stuff. You can just go through the checklist and read up about why you need to do something, and then you can go to that page or that setting and decide what you want to do. So here is external sharing for this particular tenant. So you can share with anyone, right? And means users can share files and folders using links that don't require a sign-in. This is I can't think of any reason why this would be acceptable in any business, really. I can't see that be acceptable anywhere. Now, if you do this one with new and existing guests, you're basically saying that if I share a file with, oops, that was a little bit too much. If I share a file with somebody external to me, they have to sign in as that user. Now, I can still share it with somebody who has a Gmail address or something, but they do need to sort of sign in with that email address to get to the file that I've shared with them. Or you can set up some other process so that the users you want to share with have to be invited already to your organization. Or ultimately, you could turn it off, right? This no external sharing allowed means nobody can get to files inside of your organization from outside. Now, this is where I was saying before, right? Like, why doesn't Microsoft just turn on all these security settings? Well, it's because it very much depends on the kind of business you are and who you are collaborating with and the kind of collaboration you're doing and how you're going to control that, right? So this is where you need to work with the business and decide what these things should be. There's some more external sharing settings here. So you can have it limited by certain domains. You can have only certain users in groups inside of your organization allowed to share externally. You can have an expiration. This is a good thing, right? Something we cover in the book. In this case, if you share a file or a site, it's only going to be available for 3 months, right? Then it's going to be expired. And you can also set it up so that if somebody signs in and now has access to files, we only want to give them access for a month. And by default, when you share a file, you're only going to give read-only access to it, right? By default. Now, the user can go in and change that so that the person they're sharing with can actually go in and make edits. But if you don't turn that on, they will just get a read-only link. So that's a good idea as well. That covers those settings for SharePoint. In the book, we also cover how you can set up alerts for this. So you get an email alert when people are sharing outside your organization. Because one of the things that often happens is people don't know, right? They're not aware that this is happening. So it's a good idea to set up some notifications. Right, so back to the presentation and let's talk about OAuth applications. So open authentication is a standard protocol for granting permissions. It's very similar to what you do on your smartphone. Whenever you install an app on your smartphone, it says, hey, I need permission to access your camera and read all your email contacts or whatever it is, right? These same permissions are also used for applications in Office 365 or Microsoft 365. So if you add an add-in to Outlook or an add-in to Word or Excel or some other application, it needs to be registered with your Azure Active Directory. And it's going to ask for permissions. Sometimes it's like a tenant-wide application. So like a backup application is going to back up everybody's mailbox and everybody's Teams chats. Well, that's going to need admin permission so that you have to be an actual administrator of the tenant. But there can also be end-user applications that are only going to ask for permissions to that user's inbox, right? Or that user's SharePoint files or whatever. And these have been used many times for malicious stuff. 2 years ago, there was a big attack here in Australia that our tosser of a prime minister at the time was actually speaking, having a press conference about. But basically, there was a fake email hygiene security application that tricked users into granting it permissions. And it was Chinese state-sponsored hackers that were attacking a number of Australian companies. And these applications are dangerous. Now, Microsoft has tightened up some of this around these, but you can still have issues with them. So I'll very briefly show you what it looks like in Azure Active Directory. And I'll also show you, if you have Microsoft 365 E5 licensing, there is another tool, which is called Defender for Cloud Apps, that allow you to have better control in that. And there's also a preview feature called Application Governance that gives you even more control. So here I am in Azure Active Directory again. You recognize the blue thing that we were in before. And I've gone to all my enterprise applications. So this particular tenant here has what? 25, 30 applications or something installed here. It's probably more like 40, but they're here. And if we pick one of these, so we're going to go to Minecraft Education Edition, and we look at this application that has been granted permissions and been registered with this tenant. If I go down here to permissions, I can see that this particular application has a bunch of admin consented here, right? So it can sign users in, can view users' basic profile. Now, this is a Microsoft application, so I'm not suspecting that this is malicious, but I'm using this as a demo here. And it's going to maintain access to data you've given it access to, and it can sign in and read the user's profile, right? So fairly basic permissions for this particular one, but this is admin consent. So an administrator has granted these permissions to everybody. Now, or to the whole tenant for this application, all the user accounts. So if I suspected that this application was malicious, I can say review permissions. I can say I want to control the access. The application has more permissions than I want. This application is suspicious and I want to investigate before allowing users to access, or this application is malicious and I'm compromised. And based on what I choose here, right, if I go to this suspicious, I can go in, I get some recommendations here. I can use PowerShell, and there's some PowerShell scripts here. So I can, remove all the users assigned to the application. I can revoke refresh tokens. I can revoke all permissions granted to the application. Now, in Azure Active Directory, you would have to do this per application, which would be a fair bit of work, right? If this tenant has 30 odd, but you could have 300 or 3,000 to go through, which could be a bit more painful. So Defender for Cloud Apps is Microsoft's cloud security access broker. And again, we could spend the whole day on that because it's a really cool app, but I'm just going to show you policies here for a second and zoom in a little bit so it makes it a little bit easier to read. So down here you have malicious OAuth app consent. So this cloud service is now going to, once I've turned this policy on, which is already on, it's going to look at any applications, OAuth applications that are installed in my tenant and use threat intelligence to scan and see if these are bad. And if any of them are bad, I can set it up to send me an alert as an email or a text message, or I can even integrate with Power Automate. Finally, you can also control, and again, we cover this in the book, you can control whether users can install these OAuth applications themselves and grant permissions to their own data, or whether it always has to be an administrator. And you can also have an admin workflow so that if a user goes, hey, I'd like to install this application, and then they get a message saying, you're not allowed to grant permissions to these sorts of applications, but we can send a message to your administrator, and I then get an email saying, okay, can you go and check this application? And then I can grant the permissions to that for that user to have access to that application, or not if I think it's a malicious application. So that's important to think about. All right, so still no questions in chat, so I will head back to Secure Score. So as you can see, even though I've only touched on just a few highlights here, there are a lot of settings that you can go and set. And Microsoft has tried to consolidate all of this into the secure score. Now, there is actually a secure score in Azure. Not going to talk about that today. There is also a compliance score. So if you need to be compliant with a regulation, Microsoft has got you covered, and they've got a fantastic tool in Compliance Center that's going to give you a compliance score. Also not going to be talking about that today. And there's also a compliance score in Azure for the same thing when you need to be compliant with payment card industry 3.2, or you need to be compliant with Australian standards for information security, or any of the others, right? And in Microsoft 365 compliance score, there's over 800 different ones from all around the world. So there is plenty to dig into there if you are into regulations and you want to be compliant. We're just going to look very briefly at secure score. So here I am back in the security.microsoft.com portal, and I've gone down to secure score over here on the left. And for this particular tenant, I am getting a secure score of 56.7. This is broken down under identity, data, device, and apps. And you can see how these are contributing here. I can see my secure score over time. So I actually was a little bit higher back here, and then it's gone down a little bit. This is generally because Microsoft has added some more controls that I haven't turned on. And then I get my actions to review here. So I can see that I've got some policies here, or some actions I could take to improve my overall secure score. And then I see how big would my secure score impact be if I did this. I can go to the full list of view all. There's 129 of them. And I can compare my score, in this case 56.7, I think we said, to for some reason I can't see all the others. No. Organizations of a similar size has about 44%. So we're doing a little bit better. This is sort of gamifying it a little bit so that I can compete with other organizations. But definitely worth having a look at secure score, because this gives you a centralized place to look at all these different actions you can take. And when you look at a particular action, I don't know, set user account controls. So I'm going to pick one here. You can see what it's going to tell me. So I get a description of what's happening here, right? I get what entities in my tenant are exposed, and it's going to give me every single machine. And then it's going to tell me the implementation, what am I going to do, and it's going to tell me exactly where to go to get that. And this, of course, is the complete list over here. And then I got a straight link to do it. And I can also, if I have a larger organization, I can share this with other people. So maybe I have a security team and a few people in there that I can send them an email saying, hey, can you go and fix this because we need to turn this on. And I can see my trends of my secure score over time, and I can see some other trends here as well. So secure score, very important. Use it. So we're getting towards time here. So I know we started a few minutes late, so I do want to cover very briefly Microsoft 365 E5. So nearly everything I've shown you so far is available to everybody with Office 365, basically. If you add Microsoft 365, you get endpoint protection and a few other things. If you add E5, and you get Intune, which is managing your endpoints, whether that be computers like Mac and Linux and Windows computers, or whether that be iOS and Android devices. If you go to E5, you unlock Microsoft's Defender for Endpoint, which is a full-fledged endpoint detection and response tool, as well as a cloud and locally machine learning-based behavior, bad stuff on your endpoint machines. With E5, you get P2, which is the highest licensing. If you're a small business and you got Microsoft 365 Business Premium, you actually get Defender for Business, which is nearly as good as P2. There's a few enterprise features missing, but it's otherwise a fantastic tool. If you're paying for a third-party antivirus today and you're a small business customer up to 300 users and you have Business Premium licensing, you should turn this thing on instead. It's better. With E5, you also get Defender for Identity, so it will look at your Active Directory domain controllers on premises and catch any badness on your network. It's fantastic. You also get Defender for Office. So I talked about those safe links and safe attachments. Showed you a demo of safe attachments. Safe links is any link that you get sent in an email or you get sent in a Teams message. It will scan that link before you're allowed to open it to see whether it's malicious or not. And you also get Defender for Cloud Apps that we saw float past very, very briefly. This is a cloud-based firewall, you could say, that checks access to all your different cloud services, no matter where the users are located. So if you have Defender for Endpoint P2, that's going to be enabled on all your endpoints. It ties into Defender for Cloud Apps. So no matter where in the world your users are working, you can control access to cloud services, without having a corporate firewall that they have to be behind to control that access. So let me do a super quick demo of Microsoft 365 Defender with E5. So when you have E5 turned on, we get this unified security environment here where I see incident and alerts from emails, from identity, from Teams messages, from endpoints, all in the one place. I get a single place to go looking for, sorry, my zooming is very slow. I get hunting where I can go and look for specific things that have happened in any of those locations I just mentioned. We have automated things happening. Defender for Endpoint, for instance, can do automatic remediation if it finds stuff, and I can see what has happened under actions and submissions. We have Secure Score. We talked about that briefly. There's Learning Hub, which is going to give you training on using all these tools. We have a centralized repository of all our devices. Then we have our endpoint protection, which is also going to inventory all the software installed on all your machine and tell you when there is vulnerable software there. We have the evaluation and tutorials for the endpoint specific protection. We have the email and configuration. So we were looking at policies and rules here before. I mentioned attack simulation training to trick your users with emails. And then we have Cloud Apps. So this is the new integrated portal that I showed you before, the Cloud App Security. This one here, that's now integrated in here as well. So it's all in the same place. And then you have unified reporting and audit settings for all of those security tools in the one place. Right, so that was a whirlwind tour. Now let me go and grab my notepad. There's my notepad. There's my notepad, and I'm going to grab these things. And I'm going to try to paste them straight into the chat window, if I'm allowed. There we go. I wish I knew which device, whether that's my camera or what it is that's being disconnected. I get that bingly bing all the time. So let's paste that in and send. So there you go. You've got my contact details. You have the link to the ebook, so you can go and download it. And now I will stop talking and see if there's any follow-up questions from anybody.
That is a great presentation, Paul. Thank you so much for that. I do have one question that's popping up in my mind, though, which is about the security setting for all the data and analytic, machine learning, all those sort of things, because that is the area that I play in, that I do the work. I presume that is the Azure security, that is where all of those settings is happening for that sort of data, the analytic stuff that I was describing. Would that be the right way to describe it?
Yes. So let me just clarify so I understand exactly what you're asking. Are you talking about somebody using Azure for machine learning and data processing? Or are you talking about Microsoft using machine learning and artificial intelligence to spot bad things of access to and data that is stored in your Microsoft 365 tenant? Which one are you talking about?
I was referring to the former. As a user, I use Microsoft Azure to develop all the data processing, the machine learning, all those sort of stuff for the client. Typically, I don't do the admin stuff, so I'm always curious, like how those things is happening in the background.
Right. Well, with Azure, it's much more of a you are responsible. I'm going to try to turn on my camera again. Let's see how we go. Start video. Let's see how that goes. See if anybody can see me. See how that goes. In Azure, it's very much more about what services you turn on and what services you use. So, in other words, you have much more control, right? Whereas there's not that blurry line between the cloud who's responsible for what when you're using a SaaS service like Microsoft 365. So it's sort of up to you. Like if you're using Azure ML, for instance, the machine learning platform in Azure to build your models and doing inferencing and all that sort of stuff, it's up to you how you protect that data and how you control access to it, etc. So that's much more on you when you're setting it up. But I'm sensing that I'm not quite getting to the core of your question. So did that answer it, or do you?
I think where I was coming from is more that typically what I noticed is that is an admin for the Azure platform. So those are the people that I would have gone to if I have any problem. The work that I do tend to be just about understanding, using the data, building the ML model, and then build that into the application. So what I'm keen to know, when I talk to the Azure admin, presumably the place that he do all the security setup is that Azure security, which is which was on one of the presentation slides.
Yes, that's right. He's going to be using the Azure security tools, which is also built on Azure Active Directory, of course. It's all Azure Active Directory behind the scenes, right? Whether you're using Azure or Microsoft 365. And so the identity access there is the same as what I talked about today, right? Like hopefully they're using MFA so that you don't have the wrong people logging in. But other than that, they're going to use the Azure security controls on that data, on those resources, who can access them, what's their life cycle, how they're being backed up. All of that sort of data protection and management is all going to happen with the Azure tools.
And the other question that I have in mind is looking at one of the incident that happened lately is that the test data, which is a really interesting way to do the hacking or stealing the data. Instead of stealing the production data, they steal the test data, assuming that the test data environment would have exactly the same security protection in terms of the level of the protection.
It never does, but go on.
Sorry, say that again.
It never does. That's the whole point, right? Like that's often why attackers go after test data, right? Because it's much easier to get to, right? Test environments is a classic way of compromising organizations. And that would be fine if the test data wasn't real data. But many businesses, they use real data as test data so that they then end up in trouble. Classic case here is Australian Red Cross. 4 years ago, 5 years ago, they had a third-party web service organization that literally they went bankrupt after this happened, and they were using real data for testing that the applications they were building for the Red Cross, right? Red Cross had contracted them to build some web application for some, I can't remember exactly the details, but so they were given a set of data so that they could test with real data, and they just stuck that on a AWS, I think it was, file share basically, and they just stuck it there, and they didn't have any controls on it, and then all that data got compromised. And if you Red Cross's breach notification and the way they handle that, that's the gold standard. If your organization ever get compromised, go and look up at how Red Cross dealt with it, because they did it really, really well. So that's a classic case of test data not being protected. So just like what I talked about here today, Azure, you've got to set the settings, you've got to turn on the protections, you've got to control the access control so that only the people who have access to it should have access to it. And you need to revisit it, right? Because it's fine to set it up today, but then if you forget about it, should they still have access 6 months later, right? Is that still applicable? So, and yeah, Azure offers plenty of technologies to do that, but you've got to do it. Microsoft isn't going to turn it on by default.
Absolutely. Any question from Maud and Tom that you guys may have for Paul?
Got some good feedback in the chat though. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, so usually that is good. So the link, the contact details of Paul is in the chat room, but when I am sending out the email and the newsletter with the follow-up in the meetup.com and also other channel where you may come from, I would make sure include those details as well. Last but not least, I think certainly go and download the ebook. I think that would be helpful. Although I play in the data space, I play in the advanced analytic, building the ML for the government agency and the private sector. I do find that a lot of those things that Paul that are presenting today are extremely useful for my understanding. So once again, thank you so much, Paul. These will now go to the post-production, and once that is ready, I will share the link with you, but otherwise it will go out for the promoting and back to all the channel where this has been advertised.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Maud. Thanks, Tom.
Bye, y'all. Thank you, Paul.
Presentation in the future. Thanks, guys. See you.
Thank you. See ya.